Right, hey guys, how are we doing? So, we're on Seth's second channel called Seth. I don't understand the situation. He's not been uploading on the main one, but I've noticed he's been uploading on this second channel. And there's one which really intrigues me because I know the salad bar, we reacted to it not too long ago, which is how far Gojo would get in Dragon Ball Gauntlet. But he made some exceptions and switched stuff around. And then Seth's gone and done this, which is how far would Gojo get in Dragon Ball realistically, all in capital, so it's realistically, not realistically like I just said, but realistically. So let's check it out.
I made a lot of content about why Gojo is not the top dog in Shonen right now. Most of the time, however, when I speak of him, I talk about him in a few details, with his adversary usually being so just ridiculously overtuned that his skill set doesn't matter, or just so specifically tuned that his skill set doesn't matter.
Right? Yeah.
Thus negating a lot of his sort of omnipotent aura that you would normally prescribe him. So in this video, I wanted to do something a bit different. How strong would he realistically be in a series like Dragon Ball, or really any type of battle shonen you may know of? Sure, he doesn't solo Goku or your favorite stupidly overpowered MC, but he still has a place in the pecking order, right? Where is that? This will be outlined in 3 parts. So let's get into it, starting with
Phase 1. The skepticism. Love it.
We could jump straight into highballing Gojo and being super charitable, but in order to not seem like a delusional Gojo fan, I think it's probably for the best if we started out playing in the skeptic's court. So being hyper skeptical of Gojo's capabilities, what can he really bring to the table? For speed, you'll find something interesting is that during the Shibuya incident arc of JJK, Gojo is essentially jumped by all of his ops and is put in a situation which limits his ability to use his Jujutsu sorcery.
It really does. Like, I loved this. It was like they put him in a situation, they were so clever, like, right, he's not going to kill everyone. Even when he uses his, like, technique, he only does it for a fraction of however long, and it still puts everyone in a coma for 6 months. It's like, what?
Main power system of Jujutsu Kaisen. This was orchestrated by another sorcerer named Kenjaku, who is not only smart enough to manipulate a student with an IQ of over 100,000, if you believe it, but at the same time can manipulate someone who was able to predict the vast majority of the Shibuya incident down to the minor details 10 days before it even happened, this being against Mekamaru. This is important because it clues us in that Kenjaku...
You know what, I forgot about Mekamaru. I forgot about Mekamaru.
Kenjaku is obviously an incredibly informed character who also happens to have the memories of Gojo's best friend, Geto. Using all of these factors, Kenjaku is able to either deduce or just explicitly know that Gojo's insane speed comes from his ability to amp his movements with his curse technique known as Blue. So he takes advantage of this weakness by surrounding Gojo with innocent people, which would die if Gojo used Blue to amp himself, since the literal aura of his technique would kill all of them, kind of like Aizen from Bleach walking through Katakura Town and just erasing people in his general area.
Falling.
This may explain why a character like Mahito might be able to react to base Gojo. This same Mahito then goes on to get completely destroyed by a mentally nerfed Yuji, who is kind of trying to get himself killed, with Yuji's most recent speed feats at this point being a high diff fight with Choso's piercing blood, which is at this point in the story vaguely above the speed of sound.
Damn.
This isn't to say Mahito is as fast as Gojo or anything, but to point out the very overt portrayal of base Gojo actually potentially not being as impressive as his full power state. Some might try to backscale the Sukuna fight Gojo all the way to this Shibuya incident Gojo as a mean of discrediting base Shibuya Gojo. And while it's definitely a possible argument to give credit where it's due, Gojo is pretty heavily implied to have gotten stronger over the month training arc the characters had in preparation to fight Mr. Sukuna. However,
Mr. Sukuna.
this doesn't really change much, since Gojo should still be vastly slower in that Sukuna fight, and we can see Gojo using Blue around his fist, not to mention even on top of the commentary team for this fight. Gojo using Blue to amp himself seems to be shown during the Sukuna fight as well, and he seems to use it a lot to face him, as well as domain expansions, with domains being stated to amplify your stats in the same way buffs in a video game would.
Yeah, it's like a boost, isn't it? Like,
The example JJK used, seeming to be a Final Fantasy 1 type old RPG, is safe to say the buffs they are referring to are almost certainly things like attack buffs, defense buffs, and speed buffs. Gojo does seem to have better feats in this Sukuna fight.
Like, could you compare a domain expansion to the Kaioken? Like that, you know, like Kaioken just like boosts everything, but obviously it has like extra. Is it like Kaioken with extra bits?
Than some probable light speed scaling, which I'll get into a bit later. But if you find that inconsistent, then the only thing you can really fall back on is scaling above various Mach speed statements, such as being stronger than Maki, who reacts to Mach 3 Naoya, or various calcs which put characters at generally around Mach 8 speeds thanks to their interactions with piercing blood from Choso, as mentioned earlier. You could argue this is severe downplay, and a more modest interpretation would be placing Gojo at around lightning timing speeds, with the anime depicting a vastly inferior character speed-wise, Toji Zenin, as dodging Megami's lightning bolts, or with Kinji Hikari dodging Kashimo's lightning bolts at point-blank ranges.
That's still, every time that's brought up, I always bring up the topic of the angle, but never mind.
Or at least moving in relative distance to them in close proximity. However, a skeptical approach to this could just be to say that they are not even necessarily lightning bolts in the traditional sense. It could just be a case of a typical electrical energy
firing
being thrown at
electricity,
these characters
like
that's created from
Palpatine
cursed
being
energy.
like,
Although this is really pushing it, in my opinion, as this is sort of an argument from 2015 people used to use to downplay Naruto. Lightning is just massive electrical discharges, so if you're making an electric blast capable of blasting apart guys who can survive buildings getting nuked, you're probably outputting a discharge of electricity as fast as lightning, if not just a blast of it with just objectively even more energy than a real lightning bolt. In terms of AP, being conservative with your interpretations, Gojo isn't all that fast, but what about his attack potency? How hard or how weak are Gojo's attacks? There are various metas for this, but the big three would be he's fighting guys who can destroy cities, guys who can create islands, or guys who can potentially blow up the planet, with some higher stuff being super edgy, and we'll save that for later. The city-destroying stuff is definitely the most solid and kind of undeniable, really, no matter how skeptical you want to be, with it just being very clearly stated that characters vastly weaker than Gojo, such as Jogo, someone who Gojo already bullied and basically clowned on his strongest attack, is capable of just dropping meteors which can turn an entire town to ash, and obviously characters scale way, way above him. Maybe you could just spin this as just flowery language, seeing as the meteor doesn't seem to be anywhere near that AoE in the manga, as it just sort of acts like a big rock, but the anime seems to be much clearer here that the meteor's natural heat just melting everything in its general area, etc. The island stuff is a bit more self-explanatory. Something the community seems to be slightly split on, however, came from the Cursed Spirit Dagon, a fish-looking guy's domain expansion, in which he created an entire island within it. Domains are a whole can of worms, but a brief summary is that they are essentially like taking the inside of your heart and mind and constructing what amounts to a pocket dimension outside of it. This tends to look from the outside like a big black sphere, whilst inside the terrain is entirely different.
Yeah, so it's kind of like Doctor Who's TARDIS. Yeah, could you? I think that's an okay comparison in the way that it creates a bigger space inside than what it appears to be outside. Yeah.
And this is where the argument would come in. It is stated that the caster does, in fact, construct the inside of the domain out of their cursed energy. And this is taken to mean that anything the caster created within their domain, they'd inherently probably scale to, since it was made using their power, they had enough energy to generate something of that scale. Something you could argue against this is that while it is true that the inside of the domain does have terrain that can be interacted with, that does not inherently mean everything visible within the domain is actually a part of the terrain. For example, if you ever played a video game, then you'll know you have the playable area, which the character can directly interact with. However,
okay, but then you'll get to like a certain wall, and you can still see stuff, but you can't actually get there or interact with it.
Distance, there are often unreachable terrains and skies,
I like that,
which the player can't interact with. When examined more closely, you'll find out that these distant terrains and skies are actually not real and are usually 2D textures that give the illusion of being just like that playable area. A similar thing could potentially be happening with domains, and in Dagon's case, it could be argued that he really only created some water and a beach with some trees, a far cry from island level.
Right.
This could be made consistent with Akutami, the author, already drawing allusions to video games, and with domains being video game-like buffs, so it may not be a stretch to say other parts of video games, such as things like skyboxes and backgrounds, could be used as well. Should also be noted that in Jujutsu Kaisen, deception, trickery, and all sorts of things are a staple. It is considered a good trait to be able to fool your enemy and not let them get onto your tactics. So I would say that if you could fool them with how big your domain is, that would also be a buff.
Yeah.
The biggest issue with this, however, is the anime very overtly showing that Dagon created a very long beach when he kicks his opponent, pretty much its entire width, and showing the underwater sections as being incredibly deep, which supports it actually being more than probably just a beach and paddling pool. The most contentious scaling will without a doubt be Gojo, being then planetary. This originates from Yuki, another special grade sorcerer, weaker than Gojo, as Gojo is obviously the strongest modern sorcerer, being able to detonate herself and turn into a black hole using her technique, Star Rage, which is routinely calced to be able to destroy a planetary body beyond its gravitational binding energy, and stated to be so as well, with Gojo's technique Limitless and himself routinely being described as the strongest, with the most recent chapter of JJK actually referring to Limitless as almost always looking like an omnipotent technique. In addition, a TV animation guide which gives insight from the director on the animation process and someone that worked very closely with the author, stating that Gojo's domain creates a large swath of the universe, and this was perceived as being a bit underwhelming in his eyes, and so the anime tried to make this even godlier than generating a universe. A swath, by the way, is literally just a chunk of something or a large area.
Swath.
So probably a higher percentage. A counter argument to something like this that you could potentially bring up is that for the black hole feat, the Limitless being stronger than Star Rage doesn't inherently mean the punch of the attacks are greater than Star Rage. Or to put it differently, just because it's stronger doesn't necessarily mean it hits harder, since in Jujutsu Kaisen and Shonen in general, stronger usually means a variety of different things depending on the context, with JJK often including things like versatility and
like the amount of cursed energy you put into your technique or
potential
stuff.
Into what constitutes a stronger cursed technique. As for the TV animation guide, you could potentially argue that just creating a chunk of the universe doesn't mean all too much, since a lot of the universe is just kind of nothingness. And so creating a big chunk of nothing space comes a little vague when it comes to scaling.
Excuse me.
However, you can clearly see things, and would probably see things, in this Gojo universe generating feat, which would be a plethora of at least stars or nebulas, although they have their own sets of problems. The last thing to be skeptical of is, while it's all well and good that Gojo can run and punch, that's never really been his appeal. The thing that popularized Gojo so much, excluding his appearance, obviously, was and still is his abilities, the main one of note being his Infinity. I've already talked about Infinity in a bunch of videos already, Gojo versus Kakashi probably being the best one to watch if you want a severely intrinsic breakdown of the ability, but to keep things short and reasonable, Infinity is essentially just a bubble around Gojo that endlessly slows things down that approach him, with paradoxes like Achilles and the tortoise being referenced as pseudo-definitions for the power. Very common interpretation of Infinity is that it's this passive ability that negates all damage that Gojo could take thanks to the infinite slowdown and distance effect. Gojo's biggest detractors, however, will argue something different. Opponents of Gojo scaling will often argue that the ability isn't actually passive at all, but relies entirely on Gojo's own reactions to function. Essentially, what this means is that in order for Infinity to stop something, Gojo's mind has to categorize it as a threat, as described in Hidden Inventory. Gojo thwarts these threats based on their mass and speed to determine if it's dangerous to him, and this is why in the example the series shows a pencil is stopped by Infinity, but then a eraser right next to it bounces off his head without touching him.
Oh, that is
the argument then
that is a very good example of like the threat stopped and the non-threatening item continues.
Is that Gojo's brain actually needs to be capable of reacting to stimuli in order for Infinity to be capable of blocking it. And so all you would actually really need to do around Infinity is just to be faster than Gojo's perception, since if he can't perceive you, he can't categorize you as a threat, and so Infinity becomes kind of useless.
Ooh, so then speed feats within Dragon Ball is going to be a big one.
Something you could say in response, though, is that while it's probably true Gojo needs to perceive you to categorize you, it seems pretty obvious that he can just apply the label of threat to you before you even do anything at all, and Infinity will just target you from then on. For example, imagine you blitz Gojo's perception, but you start a fight with him by talking for a couple of minutes. Gojo, while you were talking, could just categorize you as a
threat
long before you even used that overwhelming speed advantage, and so Infinity could theoretically keep him safe. This then ties into the next question of, is Infinity reliant on Gojo's reaction speeds? So does Infinity act as a passive aura type of ability that you need something like inaccessible speeds to bypass, as Infinity is constantly ticking at 1, and to be faster than that you would need to be moving at 0? Or does Infinity rely entirely on Gojo's own reactions and can only block things his brain is able to detect using his 5 senses? If this is true, then just being faster than his 5 senses would be GG, like I mentioned a moment ago. There isn't really a cut answer to this, and arguments can be made for both sides, so it just comes down to how charitable you want to be toward Gojo for this one. The series, to be fair, doesn't imply someone could just speed blitz Infinity ever. Like, you don't ever see anyone just do that for the most part, so it obviously is just a bit more fan theory, but it is sort of based on how it's described. Going off of the skeptical line of scaling, though, getting to the point of the video, even the likes of Raditz would probably slap Gojo upside his head with his tail, and Gojo would explode.
Yeah, I think it's like, this needs to be like Dragon Ball characters. I think as soon as you get into Z territory, he's struggling.
The scene would sort of make Start of Z Krillin look immensely overpowered, and Raditz scales multiple tiers above weighted Piccolo during his Saiyan Saga training, whose power level arguably only increased by around 7 or more per day, based on actual objective numbers given to us. Piccolo blows up the moon then in seconds, and vaporizes it instantly upon impact, with the debris hitting Earth also at relativistic to light speeds. Piccolo can't even see Raditz move when he first appears, with Raditz dodging Piccolo's special beam cannon that Piccolo thought should have been undodgeable. In terms of just raw power levels, Raditz in Daizenshu 7 and Toriyama's own mouth is at a level of 1500 when in full stride, probably 1200 when a bit rusty, like Nappa implies with the Cybermen, and characters with levels of 180 and definitely multiple tiers below 260 can also vaporize the moon in seconds and recreate that Piccolo feat from earlier, maybe just not as fast. Characters at 260, like King Piccolo, are multiple times stronger than old Piccolo, who at half power could deal with the likes of Kid Goku post 20-second Budokai, who reached above 180. In the movie Dead Zone, the likes of Garlic Jr. could open up a hyperspace portal into another dimension. This portal is either called a black hole or a hyperspace, depending on who you ask, that Garlic can basically BFR you into. In the movie Power Level Guides, Garlic Jr. is actually pretty much and surprisingly confirmed to be weaker than Raditz, even within the movieverse. And in the anime timeline, he just objectively would be, since Goku and Piccolo, unweighted, could tag team and beat up Garlic Jr., whereas Raditz sort of no-diffs them. This is confirmed to be anime canon later, when there is a Garlic Jr. arc after the Frieza saga.
Oh, yeah.
That being said, Raditz should theoretically be enough to deal with Gojo, being extremely skeptical of Gojo's ability, and assuming Raditz doesn't let Gojo launch off his domain. But I'll be getting into Dragon Ball and mind hacks in a main channel video in good detail, so I don't want to get into that too much here. So look forward to that sometime soon. But otherwise, mind hacks won't really affect the rest of the characters on this video, so there's no need to really explain it. Most of Gojo's cross-verse ops in the skeptical category would look something like the Naruto Akatsuki, the Bleach Espada, many of whom can ignore Infinity, out mind hacks, or just straight up exist to erase Gojo. Jujutsu Kaisen at this deprived phase would be lucky to catch some victories against the likes of Hunter x Hunter and a lot of My Hero Academia, with Gojo struggling through with his hacks abilities at best.
Phase 2. It's not looking good.
A higher interpretation of Gojo would be someone who could react on a similar degree as cursed Amber Kashimo and Sukuna, and to assume Sukuna reacted to the electric
I love we got 3 phases. Phase 1 was 17 minutes. We've only got 7 minutes left to explain the next 3. I can't wait to see what phase 3 is called. So phase 2 is it's not looking good.
Magnetic wave phenomena Kashimo could discharge, then arguably move around multiple times the speed of if you ask the right guy. Then you'd go into Gojo's statement of having the strongest Jujutsu technique, i.e. the Infinity, and have it to be above the likes of Yuki and her black hole. Most will assert that Yuki's technique is a bit different since it is self-sacrificing, so perhaps it doesn't apply, or that Gojo's self-sacrificing Infinity equivalent would just be stronger, not necessarily his other attacks. This stronger argument would be implied by Yuta and Gojo's body, implying Limitless always seemed omnipotent and completely unbeatable, whereas no comment about Yuki or anybody else like this is ever really made. Limitless and Infinity also require much more time to process and adapt to than the likes of an infinite point 3D sphere made by Yorozu when Mahoraga slaps through it. This makes the mid-end, or an example Gojo, should scale above any other Jujutsu Kaisen sorcerer's attacks in the story, even extreme variations like Kashimo and Yuki's self-sacrificing techniques, whereas Kashimo got great speed due to self-sacrifice and Yuki got great power due to self-sacrifice. Yuki's black hole has been calculated to need more energy than what it would take to destroy the gravitational binding energy of a massive planet, with her arguably restricting her black hole's range so she didn't actually destroy the whole planet, with a barrier and so forth then being erected even further to prevent this. Some would argue that she can manipulate the concept of mass to its utmost extremes, which would be star levels of energy to create more massive black holes and beyond, as when you manipulate mass to a certain point, it would, in theory, become a black hole. This mid-ball Gojo would be extremely hard countered then by the likes of, say, Android 16, to the point it's almost impossible to argue Gojo can actually really beat him. Android 16 scales an absurd amount of orders of magnitude above the likes of Frieza, and is around the level of Imperfect Cell when he becomes strong enough to absorb Android 17.
Yeah, because even when Cell was in his perfect form, when he jumped him, he was scared that Android 16 was going to do something.
Frieza in his first form can nuke a planet with 10 times the mass of Earth with one finger, and then launch the debris from it into space at much faster than light speeds, needing enough energy to dissect even dwarf stars. He then multiplies his power from 530,000 to 120 million in Daizenshu 7, with Super Saiyan Goku at 150 million. Goku, Piccolo, and Vegeta then all trained for years to surpass guys who can no-diff Super Saiyan Goku in theory. And then they still get hard-gapped by Android 17, 18, and especially 16, who can pretty much one-shot a guy, who can pretty much no-diff a chick, who can take on Vegeta, who can pretty much no-diff Super Saiyan Goku from before.
Yeah.
It gets to the point where even a heart virus barely can fly around Goku, makes Tien thinks he's stronger than he was against future Trunks post-Yardrat training, post-Frieza fight. Android 16 also has truly infinite energy reserves and stamina that causes him absolutely zero fatigue to continuously use, unlike Gojo and his Six Eyes. He has no biological mechanic either that would cause him boredom or any type of deterrent from continuing to fight for his objective seemingly forever. He also outscales Garlic Jr., who can rip through space-time with the dead space, and should be completely immune to mind hacks as he is completely 100% cybernetic. He's just a robot, and this is shown by Cell shoving his literal tail into the side of his throat, and it didn't matter.
And he's just
his
like,
throat was
okay,
just metal
that's
and
cute.
circuits. Gojo, even if he couldn't be hit through infinity by 16, would eventually just lose by default, with 16 ignoring everything he could even do, as we described earlier. 16 might be able to just blitz through Limitless, depending on how you think its auto-detection would even work, with Android 16 surpassing Lightspeed beings even in raw power levels by just tens of thousands of times, let alone the actual feats they would have by this series. Gojo would be lucky to even hit Lightspeed using Kashimo scaling. Gojo's ops, you'll find him arguing against in a cross-verse debate here in Phase 2, would be around the stronger but not top tiers of Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece, although he is significantly slower than pretty much all three verses.
Yeah, damn. Phase 3. Can we fix it?
The final phase has us trying everything in our power to make Gojo not Big 3 background fodder in a respective war arc. The first is to make him very fast. And this is done through the prison box, and in the prison realm there is no time, yet Gojo can perceive and move around in it. Not even a being moving infinitely fast could technically mimic this, yet Gojo's either manipulating time around him in there to be able to move, is moving insanely fast, or beings within it can move with something other than the aspect of time, even though Gojo says time seems to be moving intensely fast for some reason. Even Gege seems to somewhat imply when a fan is like, why did you go from infinite to Mach in terms of speed? And Gege says, I know, it was dumb.
Yeah, I messed
It's
up.
so
Yeah, I
vague,
remember
though,
seeing
that it
in
can
a
be
few
used
other
for
videos.
wank, because when in doubt, wank it out. In terms of attack power, you would argue that Gojo probably scales above Yorozu and her infinite point 3D bug sphere that Mahoraga one-shot, with Sukuna outscaling this somehow via domain or his true powers that Gojo seems to almost press him to bring out. Infinite 3D points in the surface of a true infinite spear would have Gojo at high universal levels of power, as there aren't even infinite 3D points in billions of galaxies, let alone this small condensed sphere. Although most will argue types of atoms have perfect spheres and so forth, we will use the ball as its utmost because when in doubt, wank it out.
Yeah.
This would give Gojo universal attack power and beyond infinite speed, making him a glorified Super Buu victim, or Super Saiyan God victim. You pick. As Super Buu can annihilate an infinite space-time and ignore infinity, as well as probably ignore mind hacks, as he can literally live without a head, so damage to his brain probably wouldn't actually do anything, and his body seems to be able to move and regenerate and function and fight without his brain's capabilities. And he can blow up the earth and just leave, while Gojo struggles to exist and then dies eventually. Majin Buu may also have a form of infinite speed if you think he can blow up an infinite universe, unless you think infinite just means very great, or can potentially blow up Earth faster than Goku can instantly appear somewhere else. And if not, Inaccessible Dragon Ball is around the Goku Black Arc, where characters can exist in a void of space with no time, it's just more objective than Gojo's feat is, or shoot attacks deep into the world of void, which has no concept of time and space in the totally legit sticker guidebooks. It has at least no time deep within it, and Gojo's energy can shake it and surpass it utterly, which then refers to Goku versus Gojo on the main channel. The big three would also likely need respective Wank It Out levels of scaling to reach Wank It Out Gojo levels, so fair game, really. Anyway, bye.
Yeah, doesn't get far. Very open-ended. They're the safe ones, aren't they? But cool video. It's nice to watch Seth again. Like, I didn't realize he was uploading, because I thought he was just re-uploading older videos that got taken down on his second one. But then when I seen that was an original one, I was like, right, let's check it out. Missed checking out some Seth stuff. Always fun. Thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, want to be able to watch Patreon-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 month is the last spot chance. Greatly appreciate thanks for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? You guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys next time.